The White Sox are taking a huge risk by keeping Luis Robert Jr., although it might have been their only choice. Let's discuss on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan, a contributor for SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you're not done so already. Additionally, follow or subscribe to the show on your preferred podcast platforms. Luis Robert Jr. was not traded at yesterday's deadline. Let's discuss how that's a huge risk, and let's break down the Adrian Hauser trade. And finally, let's discuss what the Sox could have done better at the trade deadline. This episode is brought to you by 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. Go to 5hourenergy.com today and use my promo code LOCKEDONGOLF to receive 20% off your order. Only valid through September 30th. Order transfusion-flavored 5-Hour Energy shots today. All right, so if I'm wrong about thinking that the White Sox are taking a huge risk and a massive gamble by keeping Luis Robert Jr., well, okay, because it means he carried his amazing July over through the rest of the season, and he stayed healthy. That's a good thing. I can even admit that. I'll accept being loud wrong there because, hey, we got a fully functioning and producing Luis Robert Jr. But I hope I'm not right when I think that this is a huge and massive gamble that the front office is going to come to sorely regret by keeping him and likely exercising his $20 million option for next season. Although it might have been their only option, if you believe what Bob Nightingale is reporting. Here's what he wrote in USA Today when he listed the White Sox as one of his trade deadline losers. They could have traded center fielder Luis Robert Jr. during the winter, but passed, believing his value would rise during the season. Instead, it was another injury-prone, underachieving season. He's hitting .211 with 11 homers, 43 RBI, and a .651 OPS. He's been so bad that no one bothered to make a decent offer, with only the New York Mets showing the slightest interest. And now the White Sox have no choice but to exercise a $20 million option on him and pray that something changes in a year. They were able to move starter Adrian Hauser and Austin Slaughter for fringe prospects, but that was it. Okay, so for those that are in the pro-Louis camp, yeah, you get your win in that if this was, if no team really made an offer and if the Mets made basically a joke of an offer, then yeah, it's probably better to double down. Because even I would prefer at least, you get two teams to bid to drive up the price and maybe even, kind of get what you got for Adrian Houser, because Chris Getz confirmed after the trade deadline that the Cubs were discussing players with him about Houser before the Sox went with the Rays deal, which I'll break down in the next segment. So obviously you want at least some bidding. Although I'm just going to put, for those that are, again, like, see, what? I don't want to trade him for pennies on the dollar or for garbage and junk. Okay, this is just my experience here in covering the White Sox for, doing these shows now for almost 2 full seasons, year and a half, too, into my tenure. Clearly, Bob has connections with the White Sox, but sometimes I do feel like that is used to spin a narrative for the team, to basically get out there and kind of bang the narrative for the organization. And I kind of get in my jump to conclusions, Matt, because this was the guy that was just adamant Justin Ishbia was not going to buy the White Sox. Jerry is not selling the team. He's not going to sell to Ishbia. Ishbia only abandoned his bid to buy the Twins because he didn't like what he was seeing in their books. He was just like, well, I'll just increase my minority stake in the White Sox, even though that stake only becomes worth anything if the team is sold. He was already a minority shareholder to begin with, so he's already got the only benefit to being one of Jerry's partners is a parking pass to Rate Field and the pass to get into every stadium in Major League Baseball. That's it. And he was banging that drum, man. And then lo and behold, the White Sox announced a succession plan. Now, granted, it's going to be 5 years from now. 4 years from now, potentially, is the soonest. But you got to take what Bob says with the White Sox as a grain of salt. As you were saying, well, James Hoffman, with the Dodgers, they tabled that deal. He reported that, Blade Tidwell, they're going to build a package around him. He was even saying Mark Vientos, that type of stuff. It sounds like to me, again, what it was, again, Chris Getz held to his price because, again, and I did shorts throughout the entire day yesterday. MLB insiders like Mark Feinsand and John Heyman were reporting. Phillies and Padres were also checking in. And they were reporting, I think it was Francis Romeo, the Latin baseball insider, was reporting White Sox wanted one major league player back, two or higher end prospects. That goes to, that totally contradict. You have three people basically contradicting what Bob said. Now, I'm not sure if there's official, like you got to file offer paperwork, but I'm sure too, if the Phillies and the Mets and the Padres were calling, I'm sure they were talking about players. I'm sure there was some sort of offer. Maybe they were like, hey, Chris, that's a high price. And I'm thinking more along the lines of these players. And if Chris said, no, I'm not going to do it, and he doesn't want to look bad bluffing, okay. I don't like the optics. But either way, Luis Robert Jr. is staying, and that's a huge risk that I've discussed many times on the show. And for those, again, we got nobody else behind him, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. But quick recap, you have the risk that he goes back into this slump for the rest of the season, and then it just doesn't make sense to exercise his option. Then you're basically paying him $2 million to go away. Now, I'll even make the argument for you. Jerry Reinsdorf luckily owns an NBA team where you can constantly overpay to keep asset status. But here's the difference. There's a salary cap in the NBA, even though, it's soft. There's also a minimal, salary that you have to reach. So it's okay sometimes to overpay to keep guys as an asset status. That doesn't exist in Major League Baseball. And Jerry has railed against paying underachieving players that much. And if he suffers another injury, again, why are you paying him $20 million? You didn't pay Yohan Moncada that money. You didn't have much. You didn't have a ton of payroll commitments this year. So I'm just saying, you're taking a huge risk with the hope that, okay, it's going to work. And it does sound like exercising the option is the plan. Here's what gets said per Jack Ackney of White Sox on SI. Quote, we anticipate Robert being here. We do. If we felt otherwise, maybe we go in a different course. We feel like we're continuing to strengthen the infrastructure on the hitting side. We're not quite there yet. We're going to continue to exhaust our efforts in establishing ourselves as a top hitting environment. That's a big part of this offseason and in coming years. And we feel like Luis Robert is going to be a part of that. And he's really going to benefit with having the resources and the support that's needed. And most importantly, he's a talented player, elite bat speed, elite foot speed. This is a player that we feel like he has a lot of great days ahead of him. End quote. This also, again, keeps sounding like the guy that he wants to get that rebuild accelerating deal. He's chasing that white whale. Call him Ishmael. But the thing that you got to understand is, and I think he's got to understand, we all got to understand, the market keeps screaming back, no, you're dreaming too big. And you guys got to remember, is Luis Robert Jr. going to be here past 2027? I doubt it. You got to remember who his agent is. That's why I feel like I'm shouting into the void. And again, if I'm wrong, okay, great. But if I'm right, and I don't want to be right, trust me, this is not one I want to be right on. You have lost a potential asset that it still could have gotten you something. And also, I was with you guys in the pro LRJ camp of taking the bet of going into the season with them. Sometimes in the figurative poker game, if the blind is low and no one's betting before the flop, and say you do have an ace that you were dealt in your pocket, or a king, or even two cards of the same suit, can't hurt to see what the flop is going to be. See if it can produce some more aces or a flush. But as you and I have seen, it didn't work out that way. And yes, I would fold. Getz is re-raising big time, 20 million to be exact. And when is this? And that's the other thing that I want to end on. When have these gambles ever paid off for the White Sox? They rarely, if ever, do. But hey, I do hope I'm wrong. All right, well, let's dive into the other trade the White Sox made before the deadline. That was sending Adrian Hauser to the Rays for Curtis Mead and two pitching prospects, and let's do that after the break. Time to fuel up and turn it up with 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. Brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're sinking birdies or just making memories with friends, this one's a hole-in-one for your energy game. And let's be honest, some days on the course or off it, you just need that extra boost to stay sharp and energized. And I remember my buddy and I, we thought we got this great deal playing 18. I think it was, we were high school or college. It was like $25 to walk. We were teenagers thinking, hey, again, we can walk 18 while carrying our bags. Well, man, I could have used a 5-hour energy transfusion then as we were dragging on the back nine. And golf is all about good times with good people and good flavors, of course. The grape ginger lime flavor gives you the best parts of your clubhouse go-to without, chasing down that beverage cart. And if you go to 5hourenergy.com today, and that's the number 5hourenergy.com, you can use my promo code LOCKEDONGOLF to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. This code is not good on subscription orders. And whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36, get the energizing boost you need to power through. Order transfusion-flavored 5-hour energy shots today. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms. So make sure to follow, subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. All right, so I like the return the White Sox got for 11 starts of Adrian Hauser and his 2.10 ERA. I love it. Well, I'll say I like it. But, hey, I think they did a good job. Some of you went in the comments when I did the short and were like, oh, we should have got more. You got to remember, teams were looking at this as this is just his heater, nothing more. And I think they're just paying for a guy who is a bat. What the Rays basically paid for is a back end rotation guy that can help you in a playoff run. And he has had solid production in Milwaukee, but there is the fear that he regresses because he fell apart last year with the Mets. Now, he did tell James Fegan he made some changes in the offseason. Maybe that carries him through. But I just think a lot of teams were thinking, I don't know. I don't think I'm going to be paying him that much. I don't think I'm going to pay you a huge trade return. And again, if you could take a guy who wasn't even on your opening day roster, and he was only brought in season to basically eat innings, basically they were just, I think they were really hoping, can you just be better than Chris Flexen? And if you can take that and get 3 young players back, you did some good business. And I also like how they got creative in a way to get a high ceiling player in that trade by getting Curtis Mead. He is a former top 100 prospect. 2024 season, he was ranked number 65 per Baseball America, number 55 per MLB Pipeline, number 42 per Baseball Prospectus. I want to say in 2023, MLB Pipeline actually had him as high as like 35. He's been highly regarded, especially by MLB Pipeline. And you do feel, like where I might contradict myself here. And that sometimes happens when you get new evidence provided to you. Where I'm very fearful of the White Sox gambling on a player that has already regressed under their thumb and under their culture. At least the old culture basically may have broken them. Kind of the new culture, you kind of feel better that the Sox might be able to take on a revival project when at least it comes into bringing guys into the, your newer organization. Because again, that's also my fear with Luis Robert Jr. I don't know if he's shaken off the doldrums of the previous regime and all this losing. Maybe he has. And again, if I'm wrong, great. But if I'm right, such a missed opportunity. But I think the White Sox, you got to feel comfortable that they can take on a revival project after they fixed Miguel Vargas. And Mead is going to be a revival project. 238, 307, 322 slash line with 5 home runs and 320 at-bats, scattered over 3 seasons, including a 657 OPS this season. So, obviously, hasn't lived up to the hype. But Miguel Vargas didn't either with the Dodgers. And the White Sox were at least able to fix him to where he should be at least be a raised floor player. And again, the White Sox need those guys. And it seems like where Vargas struggled trying to hit fastballs when he came to the White Sox. Mead struggles is with the curveball. Although maybe he's already come with some potential fixes that I want to get into in a second. But I also like this deal because you can never have enough pitching. And Duncan Davitt, or Davitt, and Ben Peoples, they're also, they're already at AAA. But in terms of Mead, bat might be afraid of curve. Straight ball, very well. Curveball, bats are afraid. He has a 184 average this year against that pitch. 170 last year per Baseball Savant. 22% of his outs this year is on that pitch. Although Rays TV reporter Ryan Bass did tweet out back in May that is being picked up in White Sox social media world, the team made a change where his bat is before the pitch comes. He was kind of laying the bat on his shoulder pointed down. Now they have it more upright, and that did result in him having an 8-game hit streak back in May. Had a 798 OPS in June in 25 at-bats. Did get demoted, though, to AAA in July to make room for the returning Brandon Lowe. And there's some things that I could see why the White Sox were like, hey, let's take a shot on him. Especially because think about this, too. Adrian Hauser was basically a bonus. You weren't anticipating having him on your roster, and when you signed him, you were definitely not anticipating a 2.10 ERA and a solid FIP, too. So, you get him, you get Mead. His walk rate is getting better. Last year, 4.5%. This year, 9.1%. Doesn't swing widely outside the zone. 23.5 outside zone swing percentage this year. That's actually down from 36.1 last year. He generates a lot of good bat speed. So the marginal stuff is there for him, again, to at least be a good race floor player. I actually think they got to give him a runway here. Because Mead's playing time has been inconsistent. For example, if you look at his game logs, he played July 1st, then doesn't play again until July 12th, and I didn't see an injury there. And it's been inconsistent. So give this man some playing time, and let's see if the swing adjustment that the Rays already made is working fully. Let's see if it can hold up, like we're doing right now with Miguel Vargas. And I appreciate Miguel Vargas raging against turning into a pumpkin. But the key is, where do you put Mead defensively? Because defense is not his calling card. Yes, he can play first, second, and third, but the scouting reports have always said he's not going to play great. 0 defensive runs at first this year with -1 outs above average, 2 DRS at second this year with 2 outs above average, neutral at third. And if second is his best defensive position, well, you're kind of hoping that Chase Mydroth is your second baseman. And you kind of have to hide Lenine Sosa there if you want his bat in this lineup. This is my proposal. Put him at first. Roll with Vargas at third. Montgomery at short. Mydroth at second. 5 days a week with Lenine Sosa as your DH. And then, you can move Vargas to first and Montgomery to third. Mydroth to short. Sosa to second. On the 2 days a week, you want to DH Teal and Caro. Because, you do have to give Teal and Caro an off day, too, during the season, during the week, because they are catching. That's a physical toll. It's kind of hard to have both in the lineup, if you're going to ask them to do more. I kind of would wish the White Sox would explain that a little bit more. But I still want to have Teal and Caro in the lineup as much as they can. And I think 2 days a week is a fair compromise, for them. And I can live with Andrew Benintendi in left field being a late game replaced by Michael A. Taylor, if it means you get some data on Mead, because again, 2026 and beyond is what, should be what the rest of the season should be, figuring out who can help in 2026 and the rest of the season. In terms of Davitt and Peoples, here's a quick write-up from MLB trade rumors. Davitt, a 25-year-old righty, earned a promotion to AAA early this month. Eric Longenhagen and James Fegan of Fangraphs described him in February as, quote, a funky low sock guy at Iowa who has successfully been turned into a back-end starter prospect in pro ball, end quote. Peoples, a 25-year-old righty, has spent the entire season as a reliever in AAA, posting a 2.65 ERA with a 12.3 K2 walk percentage. The Fangraphs team wrote, quote, we're betting on Peoples' athleticism and delivery here and still think he has a future as a fastball-heavy up-and-down reliever who has a chance to entrench himself in a more regular big league role if one of his secondary pitches improves, end quote. All right, so the White Sox obviously still could have done more at the trade deadline, and let's discuss why after the break. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, wherever they get their podcasts, as this show's available on all major podcast platforms. And I hope you guys have a good, fun weekend. I think I'm actually going to be going back to Johnsburg on Sunday, see my folks. I think that's the plan. So hope you have a good weekend. I'm going to give the White Sox a solid C for what they did at the deadline. You know, again, I like that they got Mead and they got basically pitching depth. You can never have enough young pitchers, you know, and especially when Hauser only makes 11 starts, you can get a potential supporting cast player in your lineup who still maybe has some upside if a couple things can be tweaked. And again, you get two pitchers who, at the very least, provide depth to the rotation and the bullpen. And again, the White Sox need those guys too. The next good team needs depth guys. If David is nothing more than a spot starter and you kind of hide at AAA for the next couple of years, okay. And if Peoples turns out to be a middle leverage, even high leverage reliever, that's awesome because he's cheap. And again, if you can get a viable potential back end of the rotation pitcher for Austin Slater, and again, all Austin Slater does at the big league level is hit lefties. That's all. That's his value, and he plays a decent defense. You done good. You done really good. Except those were the only guys you traded. You only traded Austin Slater and Adrian Hauser. You could have done more, a heck of a lot more. And that's, I think, the only thing I'm ticked at. I'm worried about Luis Robert Jr. and keeping him. But I am ticked that they missed the boat on that crazy reliever market. And I talked about it on yesterday. And again, the trades, I mean, Padres are going for it. And obviously, I'm glad that they didn't trade Grant Taylor, and Chris Getz confirmed that they were never going to trade Grant Taylor. And I know some of the relievers that the White Sox have were not going to get you the Mason Miller package, but you still had Steven Wilson, Dan Altavilla, Tyler Gilbert. Heck, you even got Cam Bouger in the minors who can throw some heat. And you decided to keep them. Now, I get it. Club control is a mitigating factor. You can trade these guys in the offseason if you want. But that's not when you get, you know, a good, viable trade package for relievers in the offseason. You just don't. You get, you know, what you got for Aaron Bummer. When you get these potential, at least even raised floor or scratch off prospects that have high ceilings or top 30 caliber talent, you get them at the trade deadline because more and more contenders are realizing, you know, the most valuable arms might not be my starter anymore. In October, my most valuable arm might be, again, my reliever who needs to get the biggest outs in the 6th, 7th, and 8th, 9th inning. That's why you saw a crazy trade market for relievers. Getting guys that can get those outs. And I was watching MLB Network all day. And by the way, it was entertaining to watch them just squeeze Rick Hahn. They had him on and they asked him to talk about, like, you know, when he traded Jake Peavy. I mean, it was entertaining. You know, for those that were questioning, why are you bringing on Rick Hahn to break down deals? This is why. Because, man, they made him squirm. And it was nice to see. But, you know, they were talking about, like, one of the ways the Padres gave the Dodgers such a tough time last year was they had a reliever that could go up against Shohei Ohtani. You can get those guys for those matchups. And you're seeing more and more. One of the reasons why teams are not having their starters go through the rotation, you know, going deep into games is not just because they're protecting their arms. It's just because the data is supporting. Usually the third time you go around in the order, unless your stuff is special, you are getting tattooed. Because usually what's been happening a lot lately is hitters are using the first at-bat to see what the stuff is like up live and in close in person. Because, again, you can have the best scouting report possible, but if I would agree. If you got a 97-mile-an-hour fastball coming at you, that, I don't care how many at-bats you've had, that's still heat. That could come drill you right in the hip. So you might want to just be like, get yourself comfortable and be like, okay, what does this curveball is? What does this look like? What does the slider look like? That type of stuff. And when you do see the hits, it's usually because it's a mistake or you have guessed right. But otherwise, you're just seeing what they got. Second at bat, the logic has been you are trying to get the timing down. And then the third at bat, you are going to crush his pitches. So that's one of the reasons. So a lot of teams are trying to now counter, okay, I'm only going to have my starter, especially in where the tomorrows are limited in postseason play. They are trying to go with guys that can obviously get you through the rest of the game because they're only asking starters now to go maybe twice through the order, maybe even sometimes once. And the White Sox missed out on it. Now I get it, and that's the other mitigating factor. There's always another deadline. There's always another offseason. But bullpen arms are so volatile. And contenders were basically saying, we value those guys who can get the biggest outs in October that can, and we'll pay the markup. And the guys that can get the biggest outs right now, we're hoping they can get them in October, and we'll pay that markup right now. And you had Wilson, who in high leverage situations, opposing hitters are batting .225 with a .683 OPS in high leverage, and he's still here. And now, again, maybe the offers were not so good because, he might be a little bit more of a risk compared to some other guys because his whip is 1.46. But I don't think you should be turning your nose at a lot of the offers because this is also a guy you DFA'd last year. He was so bad. And he is the example of volatile market for our arms. 1 minute bullpen arms can be amazing. Like what we're seeing right now with Dan Altavilla. Has great command. Last year, he had an ERA over 14 and made 2 appearances with the Royals and gone. So I just don't get why they didn't try to get on the market, try to get into the market. I mean, because again, I can at least understand the logic in keeping Luis Robert Jr. because you do have the club option in your back pocket and he still has the talent. I may not agree with it. I would still rather not do the risk. And that's the ultimate thing is let's assess risk here. And it's a huge, huge risk, but I get it. But I don't get why you're keeping 2 volatile arms right now who are productive and actually have the stuff to help a contender right now because maybe you didn't get the offers you like? I mean, I just, that one baffled me. That they had a couple of relievers that I think could have gotten, even if it's a scratch-off prospect. I would take a scratch, a high-ceiling guy. I've talked about that. Take some swings at some high-ceiling guys. And then create a spot for guys that are in their 20s to come up. Instead, we're keeping guys in their 30s. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. I'll be back on Monday with another Minor League Monday report. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding the White Sox doubling down on keeping Luis Robert Jr., the Hauser trade, and the team missing the boat on the reliever market. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at TajDub or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. I will see you Monday.